Hello everyone. Um, this video is going to be a little bit of a departure for me, just in that it's not a response to anyone. I got to thinking that uh, in religion, usually you have stories that people tell each other, and that one of the weaknesses of atheism is that we don't have any such. I mean, we don't have like atheist stories, right? And I don't know. I thought it might help sort of closet atheists come out a bit if we told stories a bit. I mean, what I've noticed is some atheists, anyways, when they talk about how they became atheists, they do a little bit of hand waving and say, "Oh well, I just became atheist" or something. And others, of course, go into somewhat more detail, and I always find the detailed stories a lot more interesting. So that puts the onus on me since I haven't told my story yet. So that's what this is going to be about. Um, as far as I can tell from my notes, this video is going to be very long. Could be 20 minutes plus, I don't know. So be prepared. Well, obviously you're seeing it with the counter, whatever the sum ends up being. So anyways, I'll just get started. So this is a story about how I became an atheist, basically. So I was born a default atheist, just like everyone else, and I grew up in a non-religious household in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So my dad really didn't talk about religion, and my mom was definitely an atheist. Somehow I grew up somehow just too smart to believe in Santa Claus. I don't know. Um, Sometimes, I mean, my parents would make a pretense about it, and I would see it on TV about the existence of Santa Claus, and then I would notice all the toys and the familiar hiding spots well before Christmas, and then seeing those toys given to me on Christmas, I'm like, okay. This Santa Claus story is probably not what it's cracked up to be. So I was never predisposed in believing in imaginary things at all, growing up, I guess. Um, I remember one point very early in childhood. I don't know. I was at the front of a grocery store while my mom was shopping or something. I was talking to my brother or something like that, and some clerk or whatever came by and just chastised us for swearing. And I was highly confused because I couldn't for the life of me figure out what I had said wrong. Even as a little kid, I only swore when there was some conflict, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out what was I talking? What do you? And I realized that I was probably using some phrase like Jesus Christ or God damn it or something like that, and which I had never considered to be swearing, but probably this stock boy did. So I mean, that's sort of that was first sort of incursion with religion, if you will, I guess. Um, but somehow later on in school, I was exposed to religion by another student, I guess. Um, I guess I should go back a bit. I mean, uh, in somehow in the schools we went to, there was still prayer in schools. So up until, I don't know what, I think grade 3 or something, we were doing the Lord's Prayer at the beginning of the school, and I was completely non-religious, so I didn't even know what it was about. So I'd put my head down just like everyone else, and we'd pray, and it didn't mean anything to me. I think at some point I had questioned it, and some student tried to explain it to me. Oh, you've got to go to church if you don't pray this and that and whatever. And I'm like, I got all confused by that. So I just asked my mom, what religion are we? What church are we supposed to go to? What's going on? And then she was explicit about it and explained there is no God, religion's all fake and all that. And being a very practical kid, I said, oh well, whew. That's good. I don't have to go to church. I don't have to do any of this nonsense. Good. It's the easier path. I'll go with that. I mean, it's superficial, but that was it. That was my I don't know, first sort of conversion to active atheism. But it was obviously quite superficial. Now you understand in Toronto, of course, uh, there's a big bonus with TV there because of the way the laws are. There has to be like equal Canadian content and stuff like that. But the net effect of that was that there's all this educational Canadian content in addition to educational American content, right? So we would still get access to PBS and stuff like that. And what that meant more than anything to me was that I got to see and watch this when it originally ran on PBS. And we watched the whole series religiously. And yeah, it gives you a good appreciation for science, astronomy, and Carl Sagan does his share of religion bashing. And I don't know, somehow through Carl Sagan and other programs, educational programs, I got to learn all about how Galileo and Copernicus was really persecuted by religion. And so I sort of, and learned a little bit of evolution and stuff like that. So I really got to see that there was a rift between religion and science, and that the religious people are kind of crazy. So yeah, of course I grew up at a time when teaching was done with dried ink splotted onto dead trees. So no matter how curious I got, the limiting factor was what books could I get access to, and how much time was I willing to spend to figure out these things. So I mean, I never really understood evolution to any really serious degree, and Cosmos can only explain things so much, especially to like an 8-year-old or however old I was when I saw that thing. Um, so I couldn't really expand my knowledge. I really, I don't know. I'm gonna make a video about that sometime later, but it's off topic right now. So anyway, so an interesting thing was that all through high school, they never taught us evolution. I mean, we had biology classes, we did dissections and all sorts of things like that, but evolution was not covered. And so my learning of evolution was through Cosmos or Nova, and was, I would have to say, somewhat superficial, because you know there's no tests on it, or no serious study of the science or anything like that. But it was interesting because I have a close friend who I guess I'll label JL for now, who I grew up with, and he always leaned towards religion, and he thought evolution was bunk. But it generally didn't come up with any sort of conversation between us. But I think because our schools never really pushed evolution, that he's essentially been denied any kind of education in that. And so, I mean, he's just been left without, I guess. So basically, my belief system at the time, which I guess I would call superficial atheism at the time, was basically unchallenged. Okay. Eventually, then I entered graduate school at the University of Toronto, and funnily enough, somewhere at that time, around that time, I met a woman online who I'm gonna name JM for these purposes, and it was in one of these early chat rooms when just as such things were possible. Whatever. So she lived in St. Louis, Missouri. As far as I know, she's still there. And of course, I was still in Toronto at the time. I mean, it started as an online thing, and then eventually we got to talking on the phone and stuff like that. And somewhere along the way, we were planning on meeting or something like that. Um, but inevitably, the subject of religion did come up, and it turns out she's a very serious Christian. So I told her, well, I'm an atheist. I wasn't worried, but I mean, it didn't bother me much, but it did bother her. Um, this ended up being a kind of a rift between us, but I didn't understand it at the time. So what she did is she sent me these books. These are books by Josh McDowell. And so the idea of these books is they're supposed to explain to skeptics like me why Christianity is such a great thing. So unfortunately, these books are, of course, what they teach you about the Bible mostly. And so, and I had never read the Bible, and am not, and I was not a really avid reader at the time. So, but she knew this about me, but the one book here, Reasons, also has a bit on evolution and science in the end, right? And so, let's see. So the point is, we have little chapters like this. Is the solar system really 4.5 billion years old, and so on, right? And does uranium dating really work, and so on. So the thing is, the book has all these tables and stuff, and all the kinds of things that give some credibility to the questions they're asking. Now, you have to understand, I don't consider that my education was really all that good in the sciences throughout school at all. I mean, I had plenty of access to whatever was available at the time, but it never clicked up here, the scientific method or anything like that up until this point. So I mean, literally, my frame of mind is, if it's written in a book, it must have gone through some vetting process. So there must be some degree of credibility, because it's a book. It got bound and it got printed. Why else would somebody, right? I mean, that's my reasoning at the time about books. And if you're asking questions and you're presenting, tables and all sorts of well-reasoned thoughts and stuff like that, then you must be speaking the truth. This is a kind of weak kind of reason. I'm a graduate student. I'm thinking about things in this way. That's something weird has obviously happened to me. And it's really sad, too, because although I had such a bad concepts of science and reasoning at the time, I'm a very serious math person. Even I was doing a master's in mathematics, and I'm no slouch at mathematics, let me tell you. I don't want to stroke my ego too much, but whatever. I know math, so which you would imagine would make me predisposed to knowing science better. But no. I mean, in other words, I believe the strategy of this book, which is to raise questions in people who think they're atheist, which I guess was me, worked completely on me. Right? It worked perfectly. In other words, all of a sudden I saw this book and I said, oh my, something's wrong with my whole philosophical outlook. My atheism has not been giving me deep analysis or answer to things, as this book seems to be. Right? And so that's it. I mean, my philosophy, my whole religious outlook was basically in question at this time. So this really confused me. I guess this essentially put me in a kind of crisis of faith, I guess. And it really put strange questions into my head, like, what if all of science was wrong? And I was like, there was at least a day after reading enough of this in which I was just walking around dazed, And I went to my classes at the university, and I just wasn't even paying attention because I was just so frazzled and blown away by this, right? Because I had just such a, I had nothing there, right? I didn't know what to believe, and I also had a motivation, to consider Christianity after all this, after JM was interested in converting me or whatever. But I mean, I was completely broken down at this point, and I realized that I had to do something to fill in my own gaps. And before I talked to anybody, I'd had to I had to think this through, and I eventually, being as well trained in mathematics as I was, the concept of the false dichotomy finally crept up in my head. I realized, well, even if science seems to be all wrong, and if you can question everything about science, that doesn't mean religion is right. And so I basically grabbed onto that as my tenuous sort of crawl back into some kind of a world philosophy. There wasn't anything there. It's just I knew I couldn't immediately jump to religion, and I couldn't immediately jump to atheism either. I mean, I couldn't jump to anything. I was completely a blank slate. So this had actually returned me technically to the point where I was born, a default atheist, or default nothing, I guess. So I told JM that although the books did raise questions, I was not prepared to abandon a sort of atheist outlook unless she could explain to me why Christianity was sort of an alternative to science, or to a supposed perfect science, which wasn't perfect apparently. And she told me I'd have to look into the Bible to get my answer. But I recognize this as being circular, right? And I would, I'm just, so. I mean, I think it's unfortunate. From her point of view, it would have been unfortunate because she didn't realize just how tenuous my state of mind was, or maybe she did and just didn't know what approach to take. So I should explain. Up until this point, she'd been very optimistic about me, meeting sometime, like me going to St. Louis or something like that, or coming to Toronto, either way. And when I was sort of resistant to the things she said, since she really didn't have anything more for me, for filling in my suddenly empty philosophy here, I just said I wasn't convinced, and that I'm not going to switch to Christianity just on her say-so or something like that, or start reading the Bible and stuff like that. Anyways, needless to say, this sort of impasse happened, and suddenly she became less interested in meeting up or continuing the relationship, and that just sort of fizzled out and went away. So, anyway, from this point forward, I basically had to build my own philosophy, right? And this is like I'm 24 years old, 23 years old, or something like that, and I've got nothing. And I had to learn about, from scratch, sort of what is meant by falsifiability, right? The whole concept that science doesn't have that kind of perfection. And so I had to really rebuild my philosophy from scratch. And it didn't happen through sort of a direct attack on of the problem, but I started sort of becoming critical of the media and embracing kind of just left-wing philosophies, political philosophies. So it was sort of came through politics, where I sort of got in tune with the hacker culture and questioning of the media and so on. right, and then I've got my notes here. Yeah, and eventually, there was this missing religious philosophy, though I was missing. So eventually, I hit upon the idea that the concept of belief itself was the problem, right? That belief literally meant, taking things as true without any sort of proof. And I thought to myself, could you not establish everything through some kind of proof, or tenuous proof, or conditional proof? So science, as I explained in my science video, my last one, that you have things as being true provisional to empiricism, and that was a degree of truth that didn't rely on belief. And so at this point, I simply asked the question: could I always substitute a different concept or a different word for the word belief? And what I found was the answer is always yes, right? So this has sort of allowed me into a sort of hardcore atheism from a back door. Basically, the idea is, do I believe in God? No, because I simply don't believe in anything. Because belief is an insane state of mind, or is a broken state of mind, essentially, right? The problem is the concept of belief, not God itself. So this sort of let me slip in the back door of back into atheism, basically. And so then I started re-examining words like proof and what does that mean and so on, and the idea of standards of proof, as I talked about in my previous video. Then I moved to the United States to work, and I had no idea, basically, that the U.S. was just all Christian. And so here I am, openly atheist, in a sea of Christians, which whatever, inevitably led to sort of thing. So, another coworker, when I told him my story about about jam, he sort of says, "Hey, I'll give you this." So, this is another one of these Josh McDowell books, and this is just, again, another just crazy dissension into the Bible and proving that it's true because it's historically accurate and crazy things like that. It's just, oh well. Yeah, this has gone really long, so maybe I shouldn't push it too hard, but I guess I'll just finish it off with my friend who was my close friend JL, who was religious and still is. Interestingly, had some other crisis of faith of his own, in which he became much more deeply religious, and he felt he had to give me this because he knew how sort of technically oriented I was. And this is a Darwin's Black Box. This is all intelligent design nonsense. As the book this book starts that. So I have these books I've never paid for, who just given to me, all trying to convince me to become a Christian or whatever. Anyway, so roughly speaking, that's my story, and basically I've just been firming up my atheism ever since, and now I've become a YouTube atheist. Anyways, that's my story. Tube you later.